Always Wanting More, from I Want That. Informational text by Thomas Hein. Throughout most of history, few people had more than a couple of possessions, and as a consequence, people were very aware of each object. Life was austere. The ability to be bored by a material surfeit was a rare privilege. There are many stories of kings and emperors who sought a simpler life, if only briefly. Now, that emotion has become widespread, and those who wish to simplify are identified as a distinct market segment. Whole lines of authentic products have been created to serve this market, and magazines are published to tell people what they need to buy to achieve a simpler life. In our age of careless abundance, austerity is a luxury, available only to multimillionaires, the occasional monk, and the really smart shopper. The standard of life is determined not so much by what a man has to enjoy, as by the rapidity with which he tires of any one pleasure, wrote Simon Patten, the pioneering economist philosopher of consumption, in 1889. To have a high standard of life means to enjoy a pleasure intensely and tire of it quickly. Patten's definition of the standard of life was based on superfluity. He expected that people would always have more than they need and would never have all they might want. That was a novel idea in Patten's time, and it is one that still makes many people uneasy. In material terms, it seems terribly wasteful, the misuse of the resources of a finite world. And in psychological terms, it seems to trap us in a cycle of false hope and inevitable disappointment. We work in order to consume, and we consume in order to somehow compensate for the emptiness of our lives, including our work. Indeed, there is some evidence that people who feel least fulfilled by their work are the most avid shoppers, while those who love their work find shopping a burden, though they don't necessarily buy less. Our materialism is oddly abstract, the path toward an ideal. The things we acquire are less important than the act of acquiring, the freedom to choose, and the ability to forget what we have and to keep on choosing. We don't aspire, as people in China did during the 1970s, to four musts: a bicycle, a radio, a watch, and a sewing machine. We aspire instead to such intangibles as comfort and modernity, qualities for which standards change so rapidly that the buying can never stop. Progress is our most important product, Ronald Reagan used to say during his tenure as spokesman for General Electric. And in 1989, after the Berlin Wall fell, multitudes throughout Eastern Europe disappointed intellectuals in the West by behaving as if freedom was the same thing as going shopping. Even China moved on in the 1980s to the 8 bigs: a color television, an electric fan, a refrigerator, an audio system, camera, a motorcycle, a furniture suite, and a washing machine. Now China is moving beyond the specific bigs and aspires to more, a quest that will never end. A large superstore chain is opening stores there. It is amazing to think that from the dawn of time until the time of Adam Smith, a bit more than 2 centuries ago, people believed that wanting and having things was a drain on wealth, rather than one of its sources. That doesn't mean, however, that they didn't want things, or that they didn't, at times, go to great lengths to attain them. Now, as I move, mildly entranced, behind my cart at a superstore, grabbing items I feel for a moment that I need, I am assumed to be increasing the prosperity not merely of my own country, but of the entire world. Indeed, in the wake of the World Trade Center attacks, Americans were exhorted not to sacrifice, as is usual in wartime, but to consume. There are those who disagree. Can the massive deficit that the United States runs with other countries, which is driven by our hunger for ever more low-priced goods, be sustained indefinitely? Does our appetite for inexpensive goods from overseas exploit the low-wage workers who make them? Or does it give them new opportunities? And more profoundly, are there enough resources in the world to provide everyone with this kind of living standard and still have enough clean air and clean water? How many superstore shoppers can one planet sustain? These are serious questions that need to be addressed, but those who raise such issues have rarely considered the power of objects and the fundamental role that acquiring and using objects has played since prehistoric times. In this story, the big box stores, boutiques, malls, main streets, websites, and other retailers that constitute the biosphere represent the fulfillment of an ancient dream. The local superstore is a wonder of the world. Never before have so many goods come together from so many places at such low cost. And never before have so many people been able to buy so many things. Nevertheless, we yawn at a superstore rather than marvel at it. That such a store could provoke apathy instead of amazement is a perverse tribute to the plenitude of our consumer society and the weakness of the emotional ties that bind us to the many objects in our lives. Never before has so much seemed so dull. And even if the superstore is not the noblest expression of personal liberty or the highest achievement of democracy, we should consider that it does provide a setting for exercising a kind of freedom that has threatened tyrants and autocrats for thousands of years. We go to a superstore to acquire things that prove our own power. It is a place where people really do get to choose.